Imagine you're a military recruiter. What does your perfect recruit look like? Maybe they are an athlete, physically fit, a self-starter with a strong academic record. What if I told you that the Navy has a pool of hundreds, maybe even thousands of these recruits, and that they assign them to the most humiliating and degrading jobs possible? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we are going to be taking a look at the disturbing treatment of Navy SEAL washouts. Let's get into it. So we all know about the Navy SEALs. If you've seen literally any Joe Rogan podcast, it feels like they have a Navy SEAL on there. And you know that their training is some of the most grueling in the entire military, with a washout rate of 80%. That means 4 out of every 5 SEAL candidates are going to leave the program before becoming SEALs. There are many reasons that a SEAL candidate might wash out. Obviously, the iconic one is quitting by ringing the bell. And before we sit in judgment and say, oh, those guys are mentally weak, bear in mind that a lot of these SEAL candidates are very young, sometimes 18, 19, 20 years old. And a lot of people don't have the maturity level yet to really endure this kind of training, even if in the future, say 3 years, 2 years later, with some more experience under their belt, they absolutely would have the maturity to endure it. An iconic example is Dave Goggins, who famously washed out of his first attempt to join a special warfare community, and only in his subsequent efforts became a Navy SEAL. You will be surprised and interested to think about what Dave Goggins' fate would have been if he had tried SEAL training first and washed out. But candidates also may leave Navy SEAL training because of injury. And if you've watched any sport, say, the NFL, you know that just because you're an elite superstar doesn't mean that you can't get injured. In fact, if you're a hard charger playing every game to your fullest, there's just a good chance in a given season you're going to have some level of injury that precludes you from playing. It's not a testament to the athlete's mental weakness or their physical failures. It's literally just dumb, stupid luck. And some Navy SEAL candidates just get unlucky. They get hurt and they can't continue the training. Doesn't mean that they can't become SEALs in the future. And of course, the third way people leave training is just failing to meet training standards. These are usually the rigorous standards that the Navy SEALs expect of their candidates in terms of mental, physical abilities and attitudes. And frankly, you can't fault somebody under such stressful conditions for falling short on things like runs or swims or even exams. So understand that of all those Navy SEAL candidates, there's a variety of reasons that they can make it. And from everything I've read, it sounds like while there's a subset of Navy SEAL candidates who truly probably should never have been there. This is probably the version of like your friend who watches the UFC and goes, I could beat up Khabib, he's not that strong. There's some people like that, but the vast majority of SEAL candidates, from what I've seen, are exactly who you would expect to become Navy SEALs. Division I athletes, highly regarded scholars, very focused self-starters, high-achieving young men who are here to have a real shot at becoming SEALs. Modern navies haven't been combat tested in a generation, but the 20th century was a much more dynamic era for naval warfare. So much so that it's actually the setting of one of the most popular combat sims, World of Warships, who is also the sponsor of today's video. The game is huge. There are new content drops every single month. Like this month, they've added 10 new ships from South and Central America. The game regularly adds new classes, cosmetics, new nations, even collabs with other franchises like King Kong vs. Godzilla and Azure Lane. The graphics and environments are out of this world. With over 40 maps, dynamic weather, and graphic and texture updates, the water, haze, rain, and snow feel real and immersive. Like real naval combat, strength comes not just from numbers, but from having all your vessels work together. Ship classes include battleships, destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, even the recently added submarine. I'm personally partial to the massive firepower of the battleship or the jack-of-all-trades multi-role cruisers. You can play by yourself or in a division game with your friends, and it's even available for consoles. World of Warships is a great blend of action and strategy, plus it's free to play and easy to get into. Use code BRAVO and my link in the description to receive a huge starter pack, including doubloons, credits, premium account time, and even a ship. So thanks again to World of Warships for sponsoring today's video. And I wanted to focus on one particular case, and the reason is because there are many cases of these Navy SEALs who end up in this kind of humiliating SEAL washout pipeline. But in the case of Brandon Caserta, his family has been very public about what happened to him. So I feel like it is okay for me to highlight his case because, again, his family wants it to be publicly known. But there's nothing exceptional about his story, and that's what's terrifying. So let's talk about Brendan for a minute. Brendan was a young SEAL candidate who seemed like he might have everything you would ask of a good future SEAL. He was a lifelong athlete, a 3-sport athlete in high school, and critically, his father was a lifelong sailor. His father served 22 years in the Navy, including his last several years were as a Navy career counselor. So Brendan definitely knew the reality of what it took to be a SEAL, and he knew exactly, more than almost anyone else, he should have known how to navigate the Navy's complicated, esoteric bureaucracy. Brendan, of course, went to the Navy SEAL training, and he ended up being hurt during the program and cycling out during Hell Week. Now, there's some controversy. It sounds like there was a instructor at the time who was pretty abusive to candidates, and Brendan may have been subject to some of that abuse. So his paperwork actually said that he had quit, when in fact he was very clearly grievously injured. He actually was found to have a tibia broken in 2 places and pneumonia. So, and about 2 hours later, the same instructor participated in actually drowning another SEAL candidate, which I've read the reports, and yes, this was not a training accident. This sounds like a criminal level of negligence by the instructor. So Brendan may or may not have been justly dropped from SEAL training, but that's not the point of this. The point is that Brendan was a high achiever who was now suddenly out of the SEALs. Now let's talk about what happened to Brendan once he was rejected from the SEALs. He had a couple of days, and he was told he had to re-rate, which means to choose another job in the Navy. He and other special warfare candidates who had washed out are put in a room and are told by the computers what jobs the Navy needed to be filled at that day at that time. And if you're lucky, that list will be maybe 5 jobs. And if you're extremely lucky, one of those jobs may require professional schooling. Now, this is the first part that's bananas, because in the Army, the idea of allowing an untrained soldier just into garrison, into the force, is insane. No one wants a soldier who has no role in the Army, who's no kind of soldier. It's preposterous. Every single soldier who joins the Army is going to complete their basic combat training, and then they will receive some level of additional training based on their job. The shortest is usually for infantrymen, who get an additional 4 weeks on top of their basic training. The longest can be people like linguists, who spend up to 2 years in language school before starting their work as a translator or linguist with the Army. So the idea that there's this subset of jobs that may not require schooling is preposterous. And these jobs are undesignated seamen. Now, you may think that's a pretty degrading name for a job, and boy, is it just getting started. Again, there's an undesignated seaman will be expected to go to a ship and paint it, remove paint, and stand watches. That means to guard something. And even the Navy itself tries to explain one of the duties of an undesignated seaman. This is how humiliating it is. Their first assignment, let's see if we can get this up here. Their first assignment is at least 90 to 120 days in food service or cleaning. That's right, you are the Navy's designated food server or cleaner. Now, you're also going to be expected to do things like stand watch, stand lookout, stand watch underway, stand an engineering watch, stand a security watch. This means just sitting probably in a guard post doing nothing. You may also be tasked with basic repairs, stowing equipment, and being a body for any ceremonies that may demand just sailors in uniform. And that's pretty much all you are. You're just a sailor in uniform. And it's hard to understate how humiliating some of this undesignated seaman positions are. Even on Reddit, I looked this up, and the top Reddit post, when someone asks, what does it mean to be an undesignated seaman? I don't know what a BM is. I think it's a boatswain's mate. But you'll sweep, you'll paint, you'll stand every watch on Earth, and it's, I guess you'll see the sun more than some people. But there's a plus side to everything. It's just up to you to find it. That's a pretty low endorsement. And when we look at Brandon, interesting. Okay, here's an even more vicious comment from 5 years ago. I didn't even think the Navy had this program before. It calls it the biggest scam the Navy ever came up with. Recruiters and MEPs used to sell it by telling people lies like, you can go work over here one day, then over there the next. It's not how it works at all. You'll be stuck in deck unless you get lucky, like found a unicorn lucky. You won't get a choice. It's a needs of the Navy program. And basically it will allow people that don't initially qualify for a job to do something. And in Brandon's case, right, things got really bad. Now, Brandon didn't actually end up as an undesignated seaman officially. He actually signed on. The Navy said, hey, we need helicopter mechanics. So he actually trained as a helicopter mechanic. But when he arrived at his unit, it sounds like all the jobs he did were exactly what you would expect from an undesignated seaman. Here's an example. His full-time job was to work something called the G-Dunk. And the G-Dunk was the 7-Eleven basically on the base or in the squadron. This is where sailors could go and purchase candy, food, tobacco products. When I was in the military, first off, we had civilian PXs, like a civilian working a regular shift would run a 7-Eleven. And when I was deployed, we did have something like this, but it was a duty that we gave to someone else who was doing more complex operations, and like 4 to 6 hours a week he spent running the, we called it the Connex. You would open it up and there'd be a bunch of stuff in there. So Brendan, though, became the full-time employee of the G-Dunk. Now, he was also humiliated. His leadership called him the Buds Dud, which of course you may think to yourself, bold of anyone to make fun of someone for failing out of SEAL training when they themselves probably almost certainly are not Navy SEALs. In this case, his first line leader was a first line leader who was in charge of the person who ran the 7-Eleven. So that should tell you the sort of high caliber leader that Brennan was working under. Now, he ran the G-Dunk exactly how you would expect a Navy SEAL candidate to run a G-Dunk. He actually, not only did he continually staff it despite being unable to go to the mess hall or cafeteria, and was given only 15 minutes for meal breaks and couldn't leave the area for any reason, he still worked super hard, and he actually would take orders of what people wanted in the store and would then go and buy it at Costco, making sure that sailors always had what it was they wanted. And the store ended up making the command the most money it had ever earned under his tenure. This is exactly the sort of thing you would expect from a Navy SEAL candidate, right? A hard charger, self-starter, always looking to do the job to the highest possible standards. That didn't stop his first line leader from continuing to bully him. And what's interesting is he was later assigned to the line shack, which is, it means that his job was to walk onto the flight line between helicopters, flights, and pick up objects like pebbles before a helicopter takes off or lands. And you stand there while the helicopter launches and lands. Now, you're supposed to technically complete some more additional training to work the flight line, which, of course, Brendan was a mechanic. So you may think to yourself, doesn't he start working for helicopters working on helicopters at some point? The answer is no. And this is sort of the crime of the Navy SEAL community, is that ultimately they have their best recruits who cannot complete the most rigorous training basically in the entire Western world. It has them running a small 7-Eleven or picking up pebbles on a flight line. The thing that's really tragic is, first off, that it doesn't have to be like this. Here's how the Army runs its special operations recruitment process for the special forces. So there used to be, but I don't believe it exists any longer, a program called 18 X-Ray where you would sign up and you would still be expected to complete a whole bunch of training, but your MOS was designated as special forces. But here's what would happen. You would go to regular basic training. Then you would go to light infantry training. So you would conduct the equivalent, finish your specialty training in being an infantryman. Then you go to airborne school. Let's say you fail out of anything beyond your basic training for light infantry, which has a pretty low attrition rate. You fail out of airborne school, that's fine. You just get assigned to be an infantryman at a leg unit. That's it. Let's say you pass airborne school. I think you go to a pre-qualification course, like a pre-selection. Well, let's say you fail out of pre-selection. You just go to an airborne unit. You're a paratrooper, and you serve there as a paratrooper. And then let's say you pass your pre-qual and you wash out of special forces selection. You will again get sent back probably to an airborne unit where you'll serve as a paratrooper. And here's the biggest difference is that while everyone in the Army has tedious, annoying, dumb tasks, don't get it twisted. That's the other point. We all have tedious, dumb, and silly tasks. Cleaning my weapon. As an officer, I cleaned my own weapon. I mopped my own office. Yeah, I could have made soldiers do it, sure. But the spiritual point was that we all do the tedious stuff, all of us together, because that's how a unit works. But guess what? We were all also military police. Every one of us woke up and put on the belt and the body armor, and we went over and responded to domestics and wrote speeding tickets and, if necessary, detained some unruly subjects. The point is, you were in the community, you had finished the training, and even if the soldiers who were mopping the floors at the end of the day, they were military police soldiers, and they had a real job to do, not just these ancillary jobs. Let's say, again, that you have a candidate who fails out of special forces selection. They spend another year, another 2 years at their light infantry unit, and then they can apply to go back. And it's considered a mark of prestige to go and try for special forces selection. Your command has to approve your packet, verify that you're not a discipline issue, but commanders take it as a point of pride how many of their soldiers go to special forces selection. Platoon sergeants would brag about guys who were going to SFAS and how promising they were and how hard they were working. It was considered a badge of honor to have your soldiers do that because it reflected on you as a leader and how well you had trained them. That's a cultural process and a regular process that just makes more sense. And if you washed out, especially on the officer side, I can tell you for sure that other functional areas that needed to have focused, trained, smart, self-starting soldiers in the special operations community, especially psychological operations and civil affairs, they would routinely poach candidates from SFAS. Some guys even complete the course and the special forces go, hey, we're not standing up any new teams. We're only taking like 10% of you guys that made it through the selection. Sorry. Even so, those other areas of the special operations community that value high achievers and hard chargers, they get recruited and brought into the fold and sent through their selections, which have, obviously lower attrition rates. The point is that it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to treat SEAL candidates in such a humiliating way. And Brandon's story, I feel an obligation to complete it. Brendan unfortunately spent 2 years working with his dad, trying to find a way out of this abusive helicopter squadron. He applied to try to complete this pilot rating. He then went to apply to become an aircraft crewman as part of the special warfare program. And he was routinely had his packets denied, pigeonholed, nixed for nonsense reasons. Eventually, after 2 years of trying to escape this brutal, just mind-numbingly humiliating role, Brennan tragically took his own life. And this is the real loss. He was not just a high-achieving recruit who wanted to contribute to our country and serve in its time of need, right? This was in like 2016, right? We were still at war in Afghanistan and Iraq. We needed people like this. And the Navy let him down so bad, but it also let down his family, right? He was also a son, a brother. It's hard to understate how tragic this loss is because it was so pointless. You know, at the end of the day, these helicopter squadrons, these naval operations, it's a peacetime. We're not at war. The SEALs might be at war, and some other special operations subsets of the Navy corpsmen, for example. But destroyers, helicopter squadrons, they can spare some of their best candidates to do the jobs the Navy needs the most. And that's the real tragedy in all this, guys. Thank you guys for listening. I'll see you guys in the next one.